Hello, it's Psychocore. We present Sex, Shame, and the Fragmented Self, Freud, Trauma, and the Death of Intimacy. There is a wound at the heart of modern intimacy. It does not bleed, it does not scream, but it seeps into every glance, every silence between lovers, every unspoken fear during closeness. This wound is not erotic, it is existential. And it has a name: fragmentation of the self through psychosexual history. Freud believed that repression of desire was the birthplace of neurosis. But we have entered a new era, not of repression but of overexposure. Now, it is not desire that is hidden, it is vulnerability. And in the age of hypersexuality and self-optimization, it is not shame of the act that dominates, but shame of the self. A patient, 32, well-read and articulate, once said, "I can have sex, I can perform connection, but I never feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm watching my body do intimacy while my mind hides in the hallway." This is not dysfunction in the medical sense. The body works, the mechanics operate, but the psyche is evacuated, detached, numb, and this detachment is not incidental, it is patterned, rooted in trauma, culture, gender, and the fear of truly being seen. Freud wrote about the superego's crushing pressure on instinct, but what we see today is a subtler tyranny, the internalized surveillance of one's sexual self. The erotic becomes not pleasure but performance, not vulnerability but verification. And in that shift, the soul exits the body. The modern psyche is trained to analyze itself, even in bed. Was that authentic? Did I respond correctly? What does this say about me? Instead of dissolving in sensation, we calculate. Intimacy becomes a mirror maze, each reflection more distorted than the last. Jung warned that when the ego is inflated, it devours the unconscious. In sexuality, this inflation appears as control over the body, over desire, over perception, and yet control annihilates the very thing it seeks to protect: spontaneity. Many patients describe sex as a test, a stage, a script. They speak of getting it right more than feeling connected. And behind that language is terror. The terror of exposure, not physical but psychological. One woman said, "I'm terrified someone might actually see me, not my body but my longing, my need." That fear is the root of dissociative eroticism. The splitting of experience into mechanical action and hidden self. We call this sexual liberation. But often, it is bondage disguised as freedom. Intimacy is where our psychic defenses collapse, or should. But for many, those defenses only sharpen. Trauma, especially of a sexual or developmental kind, programs the nervous system to treat closeness as threat. The body might say yes, but the soul is braced for betrayal. A man in his 40s said, "I can only have sex if I dissociate. If I let myself feel, I panic." He wasn't a survivor of explicit abuse. His trauma was more subtle. The coldness of his upbringing, the lack of attunement, the conditional love. And that was enough. In Freudian terms, he had developed a fortress ego, rigid, self-protective, anxious. In Jungian terms, the shadow was unintegrated, full of unacknowledged desire and terror. The act of intimacy activated both. We speak of consent and communication, vital concepts, but we rarely speak of psychic presence, of the difficulty of actually being there. Because to be present in intimacy means risking collapse. It means being real in front of another's gaze. And for the fragmented self, that risk is too great. So they disappear, not physically, but psychically. The therapist asks, "What happens when you're touched?" The patient replies, "I disappear." This disappearance is not pathological, it is adaptive. It is the unconscious saying, connection is unsafe. And this belief is not irrational, it is learned, layered through experiences of rejection, shaming, betrayal, or simply never being mirrored. In those early moments, the psyche made a vow: I will not be vulnerable again. That vow, carried into adulthood, turns every act of intimacy into performance or withdrawal. Some patients seek mastery. They become seductive, skilled, in control. Others seek invisibility, passive, avoidant, numb. But both strategies share a root: terror of being known. Freud might diagnose this as sexual inhibition or neurosis. Jung might call it a crisis of integration. But labels do not heal. What heals is contact, not with others, but with the lost self. And that contact is terrifying. Because the lost self is not polished. It is not sexy. It is not safe. It is raw, hungry, ashamed. To approach that self is an act of courage, but it cannot be done quickly. The fragmented self resists speed, resists force. It emerges in flickers, a tear during touch, a sigh after orgasm, a moment of silence that feels like truth. These are the sacred moments. They are not loud, they do not look like ecstasy, but they carry something deeper. Contact. The patient who begins to feel during sex, really feel, often weeps, not from sadness, but from the shock of recognition. "I was there," one said, "and it was unbearable and beautiful." What they begin to discover is that the erotic is not about friction. It is about presence, about letting go of the witness, about ceasing to perform. And this is not easy, especially in a world where sex is commodified, where desire is algorithmically shaped. Healing requires unlearning the roles, the scripts, the expectations, and in their place, inviting mystery. Mystery is intimacy's native language, but the modern mind distrusts mystery. It wants definition, strategy, results. Patients ask, "How do I have healthy sex?" Or "What's the right amount of intimacy?" These are questions of control. But intimacy resists control. It demands surrender, not of boundaries, but of pretense. One woman said, "I don't want to be worshipped. I want to be real, even if that means being ugly sometimes." This is the rehumanization of the erotic, the reclamation of sex as a spiritual language, not in the moralistic sense, but in the ontological. A language where bodies speak truth, where shame is not hidden but held, where arousal is not proof of worth but a form of being alive. Freud believed the libido was life energy, not just sex but creation itself. Jung believed in the sacred marriage, the integration of opposites within. Both knew that true eroticism is not conquest but union. Union with self, union with the moment, and that is the goal of healing. Not better performance, but deeper presence. As therapy deepens, many patients find themselves regressing, not in pathology, but in honesty. They begin to admit what they need, to speak what they fear. And often that speech trembles with shame. I want to be held. I want to be desired without performing. I want to feel safe and wild at the same time. These are not childish desires. They are the desires of the soul returning to the body. Integration begins here, not with orgasm, but with truth. The truth of what it feels like to be touched while afraid. The truth of what it costs to keep hiding. Some will never speak these truths aloud, but they will live them quietly, gradually, in eye contact that doesn't break, in touch that stays, in silence that is not empty but full. And the partner, if present, becomes a witness, not a savior, not a mirror, but a space in which the self may return. In the end, what intimacy asks of us is not perfection, but presence. The fragmented self does not become whole overnight, but it begins to soften, to risk re-entry, to feel, if only for a moment, that it is allowed, that sex can be slow, that arousal can coexist with fear, that longing can be sacred. One patient said, "I thought I had to be healed to be intimate, but now I see. Intimacy is how I heal." This is not a slogan. It is a revolution, not on the surface, not in the bedroom, but in the soul. And that revolution begins with a whisper, "I'm still here, even if I'm trembling." Because to be seen untruly seen, and to remain, that is the return of the self. That is the rebirth of intimacy. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe our channel, like, and share the video.